Welcome to Richer Soul, Adele Spraggon. It's great to have you join us today.
Thank you, Rocky. Happy to be here.
And I'm excited to learn from you. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Zero. Probably like most of your audience. It certainly wasn't taught when I was in school. My family never talked about money. It was interesting in my house because money was either very present and abundant or none whatsoever. So I recall one year living in a trailer because we had no money, and then back to abundance again. We're flush and we have housekeepers and things like that. So it was really up and down and everywhere in between.
What caused that up and down?
Well, my father was mentally ill, so he lost jobs often. We moved often. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. And interestingly enough, we lived in Venezuela at the time. So we moved quite a bit, even different countries. So when we were in Venezuela, of course, they had to move us because they couldn't leave us there, the company that had brought us there. So it was quite volatile.
I was going to say, because you usually don't go from no job to job with housekeeper, but depending on where you live in the world, housekeepers are much more normal. We seem to have forgotten that in America, because I think there was a time in America where people did have much more household help.
Yeah. And I think, neither of my parents were educated around money either. So when they had it, they spent it. And when we didn't have it, we had to find it somewhere. So, and, being in Venezuela, my mother didn't work, and she probably wouldn't have worked back in those days anyway. And I'm 62. I'm at an age where, women typically stayed home with the children and looked after them. So, yeah. So it was quite an interesting transition. And then when we came here, my parents split up. So I'm in Canada now. And so then she went to work. And then things became a little bit more stable because she was a steady income earner.
Did you notice different attitudes towards life and money as you were living in the different countries?
That's a very interesting question. We live here in North America. We live in a very I culture, I'd like to call it, very individual. You are blamed for your lack of money, let's say, right? Or made to feel ashamed if you don't have money. Whereas in Venezuela, it's much more of a we culture. And what I mean by that is it's much more community. So the community really supports each other over there. And so even though they don't have much of a social net, a safety net, I should say, whereas over here we do, in Venezuela, the community comes together. So we really didn't feel it that much. Like when we didn't have that much money, the community would bring us food and help us in that way. And when we did, then we seemed to support others. Whereas over here, you're very much on your own.
I think there was time in America where community came together.
Maybe, yeah.
Right? Because you would go to your neighbor to borrow a cup of sugar.
So true.
So true. Today, well, we do that in our neighborhood, but it's not the norm for people. And part of it is, we've talked about this. Life and everything else goes through cycles. We're in a high individual cycle. And during that, that's what happens. But at some point, you'll be back in a cycle where people are more apt to be helpful to each other. The other thing, though, I have found is depending on the wealth level in a particular community, those behaviors are still there within communities inside the U.S. And I think as horrible as it's to say, it's an abundance culture drives individualism, I think. Whereas if you're in a culture that has more poverty, you tend, depending on where you are, it's not always true. There tends to be a bit more sharing and so forth.
That's that really fits, right? Because when we're in abundance, we tend to give to charities too, right? And not give so much to our neighbors. Whereas when we're in a poverty situation, we tend to share a lot more. So that's very true.
And again, I think it just depends on the community and what the community norm is and whether or not that community shares that with culture. So if you look at certain ethnic communities, if they have that belief system, then they're probably more apt to do it than not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So growing up with the money story you grew up with, did it have any effect on you later in life?
Oh, yeah. I really had to work on my patterns for overspending when I had money. It was almost as if the bank account just drained. As soon as money went in there, it was just, whoa, what happened to that? So no savings whatsoever, which was very much like my parents. When I didn't have money, though, however, I managed not to feel that level of fear that I notice a lot of my clients feel when they have no money. And I think that's probably because I had the cycle of flush to nothing. And so I just expected that abundance to come back at some point. So, as we grow up with those patterns, right? We grow up with understanding those cycles, or understanding that repeat the same dynamic over and over and over again. And that's what happened for me. And I'm sure when people reflect back, they can see the same patterns being playing out in their childhood.
That makes a lot of sense. So you grew up that way. How did you get from there to where you are today? Is there a story in there?
Well, I mean, another one of my patterns, because I teach patterns. So another one of my patterns was I quit a lot. I would quit everything. So I started 3 businesses and I quit 3 businesses, one after the other. And what I realized, Rocky, is that any time that I thought that I had upset somebody, I would panic and turn tail and run away from what I was doing. So by the time I hit my 3rd business and quit my 3rd business, I realized this has to be a pattern. This is not me anymore. This is not the business anymore. This is not what I'm doing. This is me and how I'm doing it. And so that and a number of other things that I was facing that I just couldn't seem to address, I decided that I had to start studying the human mind to understand why I was quitting, why I was panicking, why I kept repeating the same mistake over and over again. So I went to university. I started looking at human beings and how our minds work, how our brains work. And that's what got me on the path of learning about brain patterns and learning how to shift those brain patterns to get me out of that quitting habit. Once I knew how to work with my brain and remove that pattern, something interesting happened. I was looking inside myself for that desire to quit. I'd started my 4th business, which was teaching this technique. And I was looking for that pattern for quitting, and it just wasn't there. It was like it had just completely disappeared from internally, from inside of me. And so that's the power of working with our brains. When we're able to remove the pattern, I like to say we step out of one identity into another. So I was in an identity of quitting, and I stepped into an identity in which quitting just wasn't in my repertoire.
That's interesting. And let's dig into it. But before we do, you wrote a book about it. So
I
what
did.
inspired you to write the book, Shift: 4 Steps to Personal Empowerment?
Well, by the time that I had started working, so I started teaching this technique soon after I started to get these remarkable results for myself. And eventually I thought, my goodness, like everybody needs this tool in their pocket, I like to say. So anybody who's struggling with making the same mistake over and over again, or struggling with breaking a habit, or struggling with anything that's not working for them, like repeating a same behavior, like anger, for example, then this tool really, really supports them in shifting that without the need for therapies or without the need for affirmations or positive thinking or anything like that. Not that any of that isn't useful. It is. It's just that we can work with our brain and shift out of those behaviors pretty effortlessly once we know how to do it. And so that really encouraged me to write the book and get it on paper so I could get this technique out to more people.
So let's take a step back.
Sure.
How were patterns created?
Yeah, so our brains are born without patterning, okay? Very few patterns. I'm not saying that we're not born with some patterns, we are, but our brain is a pattern maker. It pieces together bits of information and it links them into neural pathways. And once we have one of those neural pathways, the brain prioritizes that over learning something new. So the brain creates these pathways, it moves information down that pathway, and that's what I call a pattern. And once somebody has a pattern, they just keep repeating that same action over and over again. So I'm sure if your listener really thinks about it, they do a lot of things by rote. And that's excellent. That's the way the brain works. We like to just say that same. Yes, go ahead.
I think the classic is, how many people have driven somewhere and you get there and you're like, how did I drive here? I was so busy doing XYZ while driving that I totally forgot the drive.
Exactly. And if we can bring that to business, right? You do sales a particular way, for example, right? You do accounting a particular way, for example. And you might even be taught how to do it a different way. But it's really hard to implement that different way once you already have a pattern that's doing it your way. And so, that's why working with the brain is key. So let's back up and just start with what a pattern is. And let's just use sales, for example. So a listener, do you love sales? Is it something you really enjoy? Now, some of you will. Some of you will say, yeah, like every time I go to pick up a phone and make a sales call, I feel this level of excitement and I'm eager, right? And I can't wait to get on that phone and hear what this person has to say. And others of you are saying, I'm shrinking back here. I am scared, nervous. I don't want to make that phone call. That's the last thing on earth I want to do. Well, each of those are different brain patterns. So the key to working with our patterns is first just to identify them, just like I did, right? How do you feel about something? Not what should you do or anything like that, but just how do you feel about it? And once you get into that emotion, that's a good starting place for identifying your patterns. A pattern also comes with a physical sensation. So you might, like I said, be shrinking back. That's also part of the pattern. And then your thinking process might be, I hate sales. That's also part of a pattern. So you can see how by removing that pattern, you'd be in a better place to make those phone calls rather than fighting that pattern all the time. Make sense? So our brains have what I call plasticity, or what is called plasticity. That just means they get to rewire themselves. So why don't we tap into that and rewire that pattern that's not working for you?
And that makes total sense. When you look at some of these patterns, are there some that you see more often than others? Or does like every part of life just eventually turn into a pattern? Like we talked about driving. And before you learn to drive, it's not a pattern. Once you learn to drive, it is a pattern. I asked you about money. It was a pattern. Does everything then essentially in our life turn into patterns? And then,
Yes.
all right, so we're living our whole life in a pattern.
Yes. Yes.
And most
And
people are unaware of these patterns.
that's right. That's right. We are not taught that. We are taught that, you have that what you do is done for a reason, or what you do is rational, right? Or what you do is emotional. But nobody teaches us, hey, wait a minute. In order for me to do that, I first need to have a pattern in my brain that is capable of doing that, or else you wouldn't be doing it. So the brain is focal point for everything. It's where everything starts and ends.
Now, in the book, you made a comment. You said that the mind is always in the future and in the past, and rarely in the moment, whereas the
Yes.
body is always in the moment and never in the future or the past. Can you explain that?
Yes, so our mind doesn't like to touch down on the present moment. The body's always here now. There's a quick little activity that I show you to do in the book, which proves this. Pinch yourself really hard, okay? And then you'll feel what you feel. Now, once that feeling has disappeared, once you stop pinching yourself and that feeling is gone, notice how you can't recreate that feeling. You can think about it, you can remember it, right? You can imagine it, but there's no way you will ever be able to recreate it unless you pinch yourself again. So the body doesn't have any access to past and future. It has access to now, which is a very valid wisdom and a good one to get in touch with. But the mind really doesn't have any access to now. Okay. So it rarely touches down on this present moment. Right now, as you're talking to me, your mind is bringing all of that learning that you have from your past into this conversation. And it's all happening lightning speed. It's also imagining the future. Okay. So it's capable of thinking out into the future and going, what question am I going to ask next? Okay. But even all that activity is occurring below the surface. But here, now, listening to me, your mind has to bring all of that past and future into this space in order to have a conversation. Even just knowing what I'm saying, you're pulling from the past. Okay. So how do we use this? That's more important than what your mind and body are doing. How do we use this? Well, if we're going to start shifting patterns, we have to know that most of what a person is believing, thinking, feeling is a result of past based learning. And so we have to start here in this present moment, but recognizing, oh, wait a minute, I'm actually not responding to Rocky. I'm responding to everything that I believe I know about Rocky. And my brain is doing that all the way through this conversation. Okay. So if you say something that triggers me, for example, let's say you tick me off for some reason, I know that it's not really you who has ticked me off. It is something in my past that has occurred that I'm now relating to you through and no longer dealing with.
So all these people yelling and screaming about politics on social media, The problem isn't the politics, the problem is them.
The problem is, well, I don't even like to say there's a problem. They have a pattern in their brain that is reacting to what's going on.
Okay.
And it's probably anger or fear. I'm guessing those are the two primary emotions that are coming into politics right now. A lot of hate, okay? And all of that is a buildup of past-based understanding, which is being drawn into the present moment and filtering everything that's coming through. And so in order to create new patterns for politics, I would say, hey, tell me how you feel about it. Not tell me what you think about it. Tell me how you feel about what's going on. And they might say, you know what, I'm really scared. Great. Let's try and remove that fear so that you can react differently to the situation. Because the situation isn't changing inside the mind's thoughts, right? The mind just contributes to the situation. Make sense?
It does. And it reminds me of this quote, I think, therefore I am. And so
Yeah.
the question is then, does the mind rule over the body, or can the body control the mind? Is there, like, chicken egg? What came first?
Well, we live in a culture where we are taught that we think first, feel second, act last. Okay? That is not true. Scratch it. We feel first, act second, think last. Now, that's really telling because once we have formed a pattern, and once that pattern is activated, then the feeling, the emotion, and the physical sensation that occurs within the body is driving the action that the pattern first took. And then the mind gets involved and justifies that action. Okay? So let's go back to politics. We see somebody on TV, one of the leaders that we don't like, okay? And our body reacts and we feel this, let's just say, anger flowing up. Okay. The next thing that happens is we're acting. We're in action. We're already feeling that level of hatred. We're already thinking to ourselves, I can't stand that person. Now the mind gets involved and goes, oh yeah, that's because this happened, that happened. He said this yesterday. Nothing to do with what he said yesterday. Everything to do with the emotion, everything to do with the pattern that's running. And yesterday contributes. I'm not saying that the mind doesn't contribute, but it traps us in that level of thinking.
That makes sense. So before we get into how to do this, we're living in a world where change happens faster and faster. Are people actually building patterns faster and faster, or are they stuck, maladapted to the change? Like, what are you noticing as that occurs?
So an unworkable pattern is, and let me back up, Rocky. Our society is trapped in unworkable patterns right now.
So explain that.
Yeah, all the conflict that's showing up, all the polarization that's showing up, all the fear that's showing up, all our lack of being able to handle the problems like global warming and things like that, our lack of action, all of that is given by unworkable patterns. Okay, so when we don't have a pattern that works would take action when necessary, would act rationally at all times, okay, would express the right emotion or the most effective emotion based on the situation. Okay, all of that shows workable patterns. So the unworkability in our culture is just simply because we're trying to use patterns from our past and we haven't caught up to the changes in the moment. Okay. And that gap between the past created pattern and the present moment and what is required is what's creating all the conflicts. And if we can remove the past created pattern, then our brain will automatically create a new pattern that will perfectly align with this moment. So if we could teach everybody tomorrow how to repattern, and everybody at the same time could repattern around the political situation, it would shift and the whole political situation would change. Okay. So our brains are very adaptable. They adapt brilliantly to fit the current situation that we're in, but we need to give it the tool to do that. Until we give it the tool to do that on its own, it prefers to remain in the past-based pattern because according to the brain, that's survival. It knows what you did yesterday worked or you survived, so it'll just keep repeating.
How quickly can we change a pattern?
Once you know how to do it, so it does take about 6 to 8 weeks to learn how to repattern, but once you know how to do it, you can shift a pattern in a minute, okay? but you've got to learn the tool and practice it. And then it's just a matter of applying the 4 steps that I teach in the book, and people shift out of it in 30 seconds, a minute, depending on which pattern. Some of them are deeply ingrained and you have to apply the step a few more times.
Can you share just kind of quick overview of the 4 steps?
Yeah, yes, I can, for sure. Before I do that, though, it might help to have an example of somebody who used it and got results, right?
Okay.
So, I'm thinking of one of that would fit your audience, because you guys are all in business. So, okay, I'll talk about this woman who came to me, and she was really stuck in leadership patterns. So she had started her own business, but she kept hiring the wrong people, and she kept partnering with the wrong people. And it was really, really costing her business. So we worked on that pattern for leadership and noticed that she had a real fear of conflict. So she wasn't being assertive in her leadership. She wasn't directing people. So I taught her this technique. And the first thing that happened is she had this partner that she couldn't fire, or at least she didn't think she could fire them. And she had all these excuses for why. They had all these big contracts and everything. Anyway, once she worked on the pattern and removed it, she suddenly went, oh, of course, there's a clause in my contract that I can get rid of him. And then she utilized that clause and just walked up to him one day and said, I'm activating this clause and you're out. And it was so natural that she couldn't believe that she'd just done this. But all of that fear of conflict was just gone. And she knew what she had to do, and she did it effectively to keep her business alive. So she went on to build a $20 million business. By the time she sold her business, it was valued at $20 million. Now, she didn't sell it for that, but that was the value of it. I think she got around $12 million for it. But, it's once you know the problem, and once you get, right, my brain is responsible for that problem, it becomes much easier to deal with it than trying to deal with, how do I navigate through this? Okay, so the 4 steps. Let's just break them down. The first step is to identify. So I'm going to give your audience what a pattern is. How do you know when you're running a pattern? I've already hinted at it. A pattern is a physical sensation, an emotion, and a thought intertwined. So when the 3 aspects of our being come together, it results in a particular action. So the first thing that you're going to do whenever you're faced with a problem is turn inwards and ask yourself, what am I feeling? Where am I feeling that? And what is one thought going through my mind? Don't get caught up in the mind's thoughts. They move like lickety split. So try to break it down into one thought. Okay, that's step 1. You've just identified the pattern. Step 2, you're going to flip that switch. We are so used to thinking that the problem is out there that we don't often think about our brain when we're faced with a problem. Okay, so the next thing you're going to do is you're going to go, okay, yes, the problem appears to me to be out there, and that's valid, but I have to have a pattern in my brain in order to be perceiving the problem like that. So we're going to just flip it, and we're going to do that by saying, I created that pattern. Okay, now that's a very powerful statement within the mind. It positions the problem where it belongs in the brain, but we're not going to do it through blame. Just, okay, I created that. I get to own that. Okay, step 3, you're going to deconstruct that pattern or tease it apart. It's a neural pathway in the brain. Now, that sounds more difficult than it is. It's a very simple technique. I can't really explain it fully here on a half an hour podcast or an hour podcast, but get my book. It's all outlined there. It'll tell you exactly how to do it. Only then, only after you've removed that pattern from your brain can you start the process of creating a new. So we got to get rid of the old before we put the new one in. Step 4 is the creation of that new pattern. Again, easy step in the book, but that's it. Identify it, own it, deconstruct it, create a new pattern.
It sounds simple. And I
It
tell
is.
most people, most things in life sound simple, but doing simple isn't always easy. Is it
Absolutely.
really as easy as this? But it also sounds like you've got to do practice, because you said it takes 6 to 8 weeks of practice.
I used to teach it, Rocky, in a weekend, and it was great, but people couldn't, because their brain didn't have a pattern for repatterning, okay? They couldn't maintain it. They couldn't hold on to it. So that's why I slowed it down, and I teach each step over the course of 1 week. And that's why it takes 6 weeks. Okay. So they learn just how to identify the patterns, and they practice that over and over again. They learn next week. They learn just how to own the pattern. They practice that over and over again. Learn how to deconstruct, practice that. And by the time they get to the 6-week mark, their brain has a pattern for repatterning. And now they've got the tool in their pocket. So yeah, don't just read the book. Actually apply what it is that I'm suggesting you do and do it over the course of a week.
So it's kind of like learning to drive the car. You don't do it in an hour. Hey, just do these things and it works. You have to have practice. And then when you practice it, it becomes ingrained to the point that we no longer pay attention.
Exactly.
Drive.
You got it. Exactly. Right. And then eventually, like after years of applying the technique, and it is a technique that you're, like I said, it's a tool, right? So you're going to apply it whenever you've got a problem. Okay. But after years of doing that, then eventually the brain just knows what to do. And it just goes, oh, yeah, I just got to let this go. And it just dropped the pattern and created.
At that point, do we even notice that we're reprogramming? It just happened naturally?
Life becomes a lot more simple. I'll tell you that. A lot less drama, a lot less ruminating, thinking about, analyzing, all of that goes away, a lot less conflicts in your relationships. And you just enter the flow of life. So life moves on and your brain just moves with it and it just becomes easy.
I think in the book, you talk about the strategy of addition versus subtraction, correct? Can you explain that?
Yeah. So most of the time when people are faced with a problem, we tend to add a lot to the problem. And I can explain it very simply. You've got a problem where you can't sleep. Okay. So what's the first thing you say? The first thing somebody asks themselves is, why can't I sleep? And they come up with the idea, oh, it's because I'm stressed. Now you have 2 problems. Can't sleep and you're stressed. Oh my gosh, how do I get rid of this stress? Oh, well, I better go meditate. I better learn how to meditate. Now you got 3 problems. Sleep, stress, don't know how to meditate. Okay. And we keep doing this, don't we? Okay. That's a method of addition. So instead of that, how about we just subtract the problem? I can't sleep. How about if I just give you a technique to just remove the problem of being unable to sleep? Boom, you're sleeping, right? Okay. Method of subtraction. If we can just remove the pattern that can't sleep, then you don't have the problem anymore. It's gone. You don't have to solve it. You're thinking about this.
It's kind of like an aha. I didn't realize how much people add to their problems. And now it kind of makes sense. They just keep adding and adding it. Now that I have to meditate, then it's like, I need a meditation pillow. Then it's like, I need a meditation clothes. Then it's like, I need a meditation app. Then I need a meditation device. Then it's like, well, this one didn't work. So now I have to find another one. And what were we working on again? Sleep. That's
Exactly.
right. In the meantime, I'm solving, meditation app problems and testing 50 of them and wondering my life is spiraling crazy and I have no time. No wonder
Yeah.
I can't sleep.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. And we do it with everything. Somebody says, I can't do accounting. Well, maybe after I clean up my desk, then I'll be able to do the accounting. It's because everything's so messy. And then and we do it with everything. We're just constantly on the wrong problem.
How do we figure out the core problem?
Great question. Okay. That is the number one problem. Honestly, that is the only problem on this planet. If we can identify what the problem actually is, then we've got the brains that we do that are able to repattern themselves, we've solved everything. So how do we figure out the right problem? The best way, and this, okay, Rocky, I'm gonna go out of my way here to try and explain this as best I can. The best way is to inquire through the body and not the mind. Okay? The mind is actually a dumb cousin to the subconscious. Our conscious mind is actually really very dumb. And I'm sorry to say that directly, but it's true. Our subconscious is brilliant. Our subconscious knows exactly what the problem is, but it doesn't speak English. It can't communicate it in language. It has to communicate through physical sensations and emotions. So if somebody's faced with a problem, the first thing I say is drop your awareness into the body and just inquire, why do I have this problem? And just feel your way through the answer. And eventually the subconscious will be able to start to communicate and it will show you what the problem is. Okay? Now,
Hang on.
barring that, book a goal with me.
Hang on. How do we know when the answer we're getting is what the body's feeling versus what the mind is blah, 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 thinking in the background and chattering?
Yeah, that's a great question. It comes like an aha moment, right? It's that deep intuitive wisdom where we go, oh, of course, that's what it is. But we have to slow the mind down in order to get there. And oftentimes we are working on the wrong problem. That is very true. Like my friend, like my client, I should say, here she is working on having the wrong partner, not realizing that what she's really dealing with is conflict avoidance. Okay. But once she started to feel, oh yeah, why don't I talk to that partner? It's because I'm really afraid of being in a conflict situation. I'm really afraid of his anger. I'm really afraid of his response. Now she knew what the right problem is. If I can get rid of my fear of his response, I'd be able to talk to him. See? So the body will it's always here now. Like we were saying before, it's always in the present moment. So it's always aware of what's actually going on in this moment. The mind will tell you it's because of him. It's because of the partner. It's because of this. It's because of that. Not because of the fear. Question?
Yeah, I'm letting that kind of sink. Just letting it
Just
letting it be. You were going to go on beyond that though when I interrupted you.
yeah. So I do offer a free call to anybody who wants to really understand what the real problem is. So if anybody's stuck, I am always here to help. You can book a call on my calendar. And I offer that to all of your listeners, Rocky, because I know how it feels to be stuck and to be working on the wrong thing. And it can be very frustrating.
Now, one of the things that all of this involves is learning to surrender,
Yes.
to let go. Do you find that most people find it easy to let go, or is it hard to surrender?
That is the trickiest step, right? To just be a surrendered witness to what is rather than fight it all the time. Okay. It truly is an actual fact that what we resist persists. That is not just a cliche saying. Okay. If we're resisting something and fighting something all the time, internally and externally, it does tend to just remain present, remain constant. So surrender is the most powerful thing on this planet that we can do. But it's not surrendering, throwing in the white flag. It's not surrendering at the level of action. It's surrendering at the level of observing, just being a detached witness to what is going on internally inside. As soon as we're able to do that, then the mind is able to see, the subconscious is able to show us that two different realities are actually present at the same time. The reality of the pattern, what the pattern tells you, like, oh boy, Rocky, he's XYZ, right? And then what's actually going on, Rocky just being present, listening, and okay. And when those two don't align, that's when the mind deconstructs the pattern, lets it go, and creates a new one. So surrender is powerful. It is hard because we have this impression of it as being giving up or throwing in the white towel. Not true. That answer your question about surrender?
It does. Yes, very
Okay.
much so. The other thing you talk about, and this kind of gets out to the edges, is the vibration of the situation. It's kind of like the energy of the situation, right? You can walk into a room and feel the energy of it. Certain people, like when they walk into the room, they bring energy. And there's other rooms you walk into and it's like, ooh, I don't want to be in here. It just doesn't feel. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. So our body is always, so first of all, our brain is inside a dark, silent room. Okay. There is nothing occurring within the brain. There's no sound. There's no sight. There's no touch. There's no feel. There is absolutely nothing going on in there other than electrical impulses. It's pitch black. Okay. So where does it get all this information? Well, information comes in through the senses, right? Comes in through the eyes, the ears, the touch. The first place that's going to is the nervous system. And the nervous system has the body vibrate in response to every single sensory data it picks up. Okay, so the body is constantly in this state of vibration. And I'll give you some examples so that this makes sense. You're walking down the street and you see like this dead animal in front of you, this roadkill, and your whole body will shudder and it will start at the knees and work its way up, right? Have you all felt that? That's before the mind knows that this is a dead animal. The body is already reacting. Okay. Same when you touch a stove, your body's already reacting before your mind says, hey, move your hand off that stove. Your hand would be totally burned if you had to wait for the mind to move the hand. The body's reacting. So this vibration is occurring constantly all the time. So let's just take something that maybe some of your listeners face. Let's say that you go into like a networking situation and you walk into a room and you have a pattern that has some social phobia, for example. Okay? Your body is screaming, get me out of here, right? And it doesn't matter what the mind is saying. It doesn't matter if the mind is saying, hey, stay, this would be really good for you. Your body's reacting with that vibration. So it's that vibration that is triggering your patterns. And it's happening all the time. It's happening right here as you're listening to this. Most of the time it's below our level of awareness and we don't need to pay any attention to it. Sometimes it's so pronounced that it alerts us and we do something.
That's why I find having a somatic coach is phenomenal, because they see those micro tiny little things that you miss.
Exactly.
And people who are good at that are really good at calling it out. Here's the thing though, we're all good at it. We don't pay attention to it, but yet we do, right? So you might walk into that situation and you see that socially awkward person and you might just turn and walk the other way. You won't think about it. The pattern will just be like, get away, right? Because you don't want to be there. But you don't actively have awareness of it.
That's right. The pattern moves you into action either away or for some people towards, right?
Yes.
So depending on the pattern. But yeah, the pattern is taking that action. You're not consciously choosing to take that action, right? And it's the awareness. Oh yeah, okay, I'm responding here in a way that's not working for me. Walking away or towards somebody in a networking situation won't make any difference. But in some cases, if you're the socially awkward person, then you feel that, right? This isn't working for me. And so, okay, I'm just going to identify that pattern. I'm not going to make it wrong. I'm not going to fight it. I'm not going to judge myself. Very important, listener. I'm just going to identify it.
Now, you talk about the fact that this process uses both sides of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that relevant?
Because we have overeducated the left side. So, okay, now most people think about the left side and the right side of their brain as the right side being creative, the left side being logic, right side being imagination, the left side being analytical. Not true. Let's just scratch all of that out of our understanding. But the left side and the right side are working very differently. And how they work is this. The right side is absorbing everything in your current moment space. Everything that comes in through your sensory data, your senses, goes first to the right hemisphere. From there, it is passed over to the left hemisphere, where the left hemisphere interprets it. It breaks it up into pieces, into self and other, into outside, inside. Right hemisphere is absorbing everything, but it has no way to communicate everything that it knows. Left hemisphere is only picking up parts, pieces, based on its patterning of what is going on in the space. This gets a little tricky to understand. Now, what happens is we're acting too much in that left hemisphere now. We've overeducated it. So we're believing ourselves too much. Okay. We believe that we know too much. We know everything. We know that we are socially awkward. We know that we're afraid of being in this space. Okay. And we're not questioning that anymore. And what we should be doing is taking that pattern and moving it back to the right hemisphere for integration. And once we start using our whole brain, that's when we really start to see remarkable changes in our own behavior and in how we relate to each individual situation. Because the right hemisphere knows a lot more than what the left hemisphere does, but it doesn't have any way to communicate. And the left hemisphere thinks it knows way too much, and it is no longer communicating with our right hemisphere. So a whole brain now is necessary in this time of change.
Is there a way to train ourselves to stay more on the right side?
Once you start repatterning and applying the 4 steps, you are moving between the 2 hemispheres of the brain. Each step is a different hemisphere. And so you will naturally start to build a bridge between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. So you don't have to worry about it. It happens when you start using the tool. Can we start using more of our right hemisphere? Connect more to the body. Somatic therapies are great because the right hemisphere and the body are much more deeply aligned than the left hemisphere is. The left hemisphere is more aligned with the mind. So connect more to meditation, through things like that, through somatic practices, and really start to doubt everything that your conscious mind tells you. just plant a seed of doubt. It's only seeing a partial picture. It is not seeing the richness and the fullness of your current situation. So just plant that seed of doubt. Maybe there's more here that I am unaware of. And I outline an activity in the book that really makes that present. If you just take a walk and just say, what's here that I'm currently not aware of? And just keep looking around. And then you'll see something that you didn't know was there. And then ask the question again. And that will also build a communication with your right hemisphere.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many inputs throughout our day that we ignore the majority of what's going on around us.
Absolutely.
And so taking the time to retune our sensors to pay more attention or to change what we're filtering and how we're filtering also seems like part of this process too of the patterning that goes on, which kind of, and I think you asked this in the book, it's the age old question, who am I? And that's a deep question that I find most people can never answer how much is enough. Most people can't always answer who am I really beyond the patterned labels that I've been given, because I'm guessing nobody picked their name, right? Nobody picked their body, their sex. There's all these things that were assigned to you, and you've probably put a pattern onto it and haven't necessarily questioned all those things.
Yes, exactly. Right? And you can see it in siblings, like any of your listener has a sibling. You're typically opposite to what that person is, right? Or display different characteristics because they already had that. And so you couldn't be that. Okay. And so, yeah. So all of that has been assigned to you. And yet there's so much more inside of a person than what they believe they are. There are so many more identities. I like to say that we are not one identity. We are a myriad of identities in one person. And in any given situation, you are different depending on the situation you're in. So you walk into the office, you're a different person than when you're at home. You go out with friends, you're a different person than you are with your spouse. Okay? And in every single situation, you're actually a different identity. And human beings are more like shapeshifters than we are like consistent one person identities that we're all seeking. These are authentic identities. They don't exist. Forget it. And who we really are is just adaptability itself. That is the nature of the human brain. We adapt.
So change should be easy.
It is easy once we know how to bring it about. It's very easy. But when we're educated through the left hemisphere to believe that we are a thing that travels from place to place, we get stuck in that mode of thinking.
Is there anything we should have talked about from the book, but I didn't get a chance to ask about?
I think the only thing that I really like to stress is that we don't usually face our problems by thinking about our brain. It's ideally, it is the first and last place that we look, because you are like anybody who's faced with a problem and knows how to use a method of subtraction to remove that problem. First of all, life becomes a dance. I mean, it's so much easier than all of the strategizing and trying to figure it all out that we do. But also something else remarkable happens. We stop blaming ourselves and we stop looking for who's to blame. And we start to live in this beautiful space of self-forgiveness, of self-love, of capacity, real authenticity, really, like authentically being who you are as brain patterns, as the ability to just shift and change anything that you're faced with. So, yeah, I mean, the book is really about freedom. It's about facing the world head on and having the freedom to just let go of anything that's in your way.
And it's not that hard based on what you're saying.
No, it really isn't. It really isn't. It's much harder to try and figure out all our problems and solve them.
Do you feel a lot of people resist that change?
Resist doing the technique, you mean?
Resist even change? Wanting to learn about the technique or face it or use the technique.
Sometimes. Remember, we've been really educated to look for solutions and not to remove our problems. So it is oftentimes that's when people first come to this technique, they go, this is too good to be true. Okay. That's typically why it's so they don't give it a try. But once they give it a try, once they see the magic of it, they go, yeah, now I get it. Now I get it. And then they don't resist it anymore. So
that's the key. Give it a try. Don't resist and see if it changes your life.
Try it on. See if
What's one truth about success you wish more people understood?
success isn't about climbing a ladder or getting somewhere. Success truly is about discovering internally where you are best at and then utilizing it. And if we can go inwards first instead of out there all the time, yeah, success is then easy.
Success becomes easy when you know where you fit, so to speak. You know what your talents and what you have of value that the world wants, and then it just becomes fun and easy. It doesn't really take work to be successful. What's a lesson that cost you a lot but was worth every penny?
I had to stop chasing the money. My first 3 businesses were all about, okay, how do I make money? How do I make money? And I wasn't really looking at, do I want to do this? It cost me a lot.
And I think that's the biggest thing. A lot of people go into business trying to do something that is more about making the money than it is about doing what they love or even solving a problem that the world has. When you do that, everything else, again, becomes easy. The theme of today, life becomes easy when you do things in a certain way. If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Stop trying to be like everybody else.
There you go.
Right? Stop trying to be like the gurus out there and just be yourself.
If people would like to learn more about you, find out about the book, what's the best way for them to do that?
So Shift 4 Steps is my website, SHIFT, the number 4, STEPS.com. You can get a free copy of my book online. You can book a call with me for free. There's some free other goodies in there, events and stuff we do. Yeah, get the tool.
That is awesome. We'll make sure to put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rocky. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, thanks for checking out the full unedited video of the Richer Soul podcast. You can get the full audio podcast with intro, outro, and a ton more details here on YouTube or whatever your favorite podcast player is. Don't forget, we've got hundreds of episodes for you to go back through, and you can also get episode information on the Richer Soul website as well. Don't forget to subscribe so you're automatically updated as to what's going on and every time we release a new episode. The first few episodes of the Richer Soul podcast actually lay out the entire framework that everything is built on over all of these years. So check them out as well. Thanks for listening.